Hello, I'm Jesper. I'm going to talk to you for the next 20 minutes, so I hope you're ready. It's going to be fast because we have like 30 slides to go through, so it's going to be really fast, but hopefully really interesting as well. I'm going to be talking about commercial opportunities and potential in the games industry, and I'm representing, as Anna said, Vision Denmark. But let's get started. Let me see here. So my talk today is going to be like, who am I and where do I come from? We're going to talk about the global games market, the local games industry, and tendencies and opportunities that arises from these and are like general trends in the industry. So let's start out with who am I and where do I come from? Okay, so this is like my magic card. My name is Jesper, and I work for Vision Denmark as a games consultant. Like my career to getting here in like 5 easy steps, like to give you an idea of my background. I have a master's degree in design and media science from the University of Copenhagen. And from there I went out and I was employed as what was called like an engagement manager at Microsoft Denmark for 5 years, which basically meant, you know, trying to keep people on like MSN and Messenger for as long as possible. Then from there on, I went on to become like a freelance game designer, audio designer. Then I became employed at Interactive Denmark, first part-time and then full-time. And then eventually Interactive Denmark became part of Vision Denmark that I'm representing today. And in addition to all of this, I'm also the author, a sole author of one book and co-author of another book about the Danish games industry, which is these two books. And in general, I've been writing about games for like pretty much the last 20 years with like a specific interest in the Danish games industry, both for like books like this, but also for like game sites like the Danish version of IGN and Eurogamer, and also did some stuff for the Metro newspaper when that was around. So about who I'm representing, Vision Denmark. Like this is like the blurb that's on the homepage about Vision Denmark. It's a nationwide innovation business alliance that aims to boost the visual storytelling and entertainment industry by bringing together Danish producers and suppliers of creative technology, research, and knowledge institutions and other parts of the business community. I mean, that's a very long and very like detailed description, but to give like the essence of the mission of Vision Denmark is the belief that that by adding together like games and TV and film and animation and what we define as XR, which is like VR and AR and stuff like that, that the sum becomes greater than the parts. That if these sectors can work together, there's a huge advantage and a huge potential to be released, because the technologies and the tools that we're using in these industries are becoming more and more similar. So that's like the basic idea of Vision Denmark. So that's about, you know, who I am and who I represent. So let's move on and talk about a bit about like the global games industry to get an idea about, you know, what does it actually look like at this moment, you know, in 2020. So this is from like the Newzoo, which is like probably one of the most used like business analyst agencies about, you know, the games industry. And this is like how the industry looks right now and like how it's projected to look up until 2022. So as anybody can see, it's pretty huge. It's actually on track to cross like $200 billion in 2023, which is of course like a almost incomprehensible number. And what is more interesting also that it shows a pretty steady growth of about 10% a year or 9% in this case, but it seems pretty steady. I mean, this has been going on for probably in the last almost 20 years. That's been growing like 10% every year. If you go into some details about this, the share, that you can see that about half of the revenue generated in the industry comes from like smartphones and tablets, which means iOS and Android. So despite the perception about, for example, like consoles being like defining for the games industry, it makes up like less than a third of the industry. Of course, it takes up like a large mind share and publicity, but the revenue generated is like half of that comes from mobile. And if we look at geography, this is where revenue comes from geographically. We can see that Asia actually makes up almost half of the revenue generated in the industry alone. So like Europe and North America together makes up, that's, you can say that that's kind of like, that's one half, and then you have Asia, which is like the other half, and then you have like some smaller markets in between. So that might be surprising to some, and I mean that's one of the messages that we try to go out with when we talk to game developers, is just to tell them, you know, be observant of, you know, there's a huge market outside of just push, oh, we're just gonna make it in English and that'll be fine, everybody can understand English. That's not necessarily the case. Actually, as well, when you say, oh, you can just publish it in Europe in English or stuff like that, there's actually a lot of markets in Europe where they will prefer a localized version, like Spanish, Italian, German, stuff like that. So I mean, that's usually kind of one of the things we say, like, you know, be observant of what the market actually looks like and where revenue comes from. And then this next slide just shows that the value of each individual player is still larger in the West generally. This is like a chart showing the number of players, where you can see that here, like the North America and Europe is an even smaller minority, but this also leads to the conclusion that they spend more money per person. So they are worth more, you could say. So with that kind of like talking about, you know, this is what the global games industry looks like, let's take a look at the Danish games industry and what constitutes that. So I found some key figures. These are from 2018 because it takes a very long time from the Dansk Statistik, the Danish Statistical Service, to pick up data. So these are the latest numbers we have, where we can say there's 159 game development companies in Denmark, active companies in Denmark, which employ the equivalent of 955 full-time employees. And these will usually be distributed, they will usually be more numbers. It's just what it converts to almost 1,000 like full-time employees, because you have a lot of freelancers and part-time workers and stuff like that. So I mean, if you're counting specific persons, that number is probably going to be higher. The collective turnover of the industry is just above 1 billion Danish kroner. And the export part is about 650 million, which is fairly good for industries in like the creative sector. The average employees per company is, of course, 6. You can just divide up the numbers. And another small division item 8 is like the export share of the turnover, 61%, which, as I said, is pretty high for especially if we compare to like the other sectors in the Vision Denmark cluster. If you look at TV and film, like they don't have nearly as high a degree of exports. So, and this is like the development of the revenue in the industry over the last pretty much 10 years. This is the only graph I can find. This is actually a year older, so I actually updated it with just games, so you can see where games is now. It's here, and this shows that over the last 10 years, the games industry in Denmark has grown by about 184%. which converts to a growth of 11% a year. So it's actually pretty much in line with like the global trend. So we're kind of performing a bit better than that, but not by too much. Yeah. So if we look at like characteristics of the business, some more numbers is that about 60% of the companies are located in Copenhagen, so it's very centralized industry. And if you're counting employees or people employed, that number will probably be even higher, or that share will be higher, because the companies that are located in Copenhagen are the ones that have a lot of people working for them. It's like Movistar Planet, Cybo, IO Interactive are probably the three ones that they employ about 100 people each. So that alone like accounts for a lot of people. The majority of the revenue in the industry is made by a small minority of businesses. I mean, it's a hit-driven business, and I mean that's generally defining for games. But that also means that the revenue generated is very unevenly distributed. A lot of companies are very small. This is not surprising. Looking at the previous slides, was an average of like 6 employees per company, and you have 3 companies that have about 100 people. So that means a lot of the remaining ones are very small, and a lot of them are actually like one-man companies. Like the greatest need that we have identified for the industry is that they need financing. Of course, like all industries would say, oh, we need money. But actually what the games industry needs the most is actually like investments. It's not necessarily just funding support, it's more investments. And that has always been a challenge, but it's become worse because there was like a partly state-funded games investor called Capnova that some of you may have heard about, that was actually defunded by the state 2 years ago, and that has kind of left a gap in the industry at home, where in the span between 1 and 4 million Danish kroner, if you need investments in that span, it's really hard to find, because there are no obvious other sources in Denmark, and it's still too small to get those investments from abroad generally. So that's like probably the biggest challenge right now for the industry. But also, yeah, there's a huge potential when things go right. We can look at stuff like recent successes would be stuff like Ghost Ship Games, who made like Deep Rock Galactic, which even while still in early access, it had sold more than 1 million copies. You could look at stuff like Triband, who made What the Golf, that like not only won a lot of awards, but also sold really well, and they're expanding heavily right now, just moving to a new office, hiring people and growing, and also had really large commercial success with What the Golf. Then I have a couple of so also to kind of illustrate the potential of the Danish games industry, we usually pull out the slide to show that we compare ourselves to Finland and Sweden a lot, because we say we are very much alike Finland and Sweden in that we have a population that's tech savvy, high level of education, social security, great access to good internet lines, stuff like that. And looking at this chart, we would probably say that all the empty space above the Danish bar, like that's the potential that we should at least strive to climb somewhat up and be comparable to Finland and Sweden. At least that's the argument we make. Then I have a couple of slides that are probably that I wanted to include. It's from some research we did at Vision Denmark that I thought would be interesting, because this is hosted by DIKU. It shows something about the composition of educations in the industry. That an interesting development here is that the development from 2010 to 2018 is like, you can see that a lot more people now have long educations, which we think is because the Danish educational system is adopting to and are now more focused on actually training and educating people to go into the games industry. So you can see the growth in that, and a couple of other numbers from that research is that there's a huge need for programmers, which of course, DIKU, we hope that DIKU will supply for the industry. And also another interesting fact that kind of underlines the international outlook and international element in the industry is the graph on the right shows the number of employees in the industry that are not like registered citizens in Denmark. So that's like foreign employees. That shows that actually more than a quarter of the people working in the Danish games industry are not Danish. So then I want to talk about, I've grouped it into two, like internal opportunities, which are like opportunities within the games industry itself, and then external opportunities, which is like opportunities that lies outside of the games industry itself. So if you look at the internal opportunities, well, there's subscription services. You probably know these: Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, Apple Arcade. These are only growing in importance and size, and this means that instead of earlier where it was like a democratization where you would just push your game out to Steam or the App Store or whatever and kind of fight for yourself, now we're moving back towards a model where you need to get access to the gatekeepers for these services. So instead of just pushing your game out and pushing it straight to the consumer, now you have to find and talk to the gatekeepers for these services and convince these. So you have to please the gatekeepers for these services as well as the players who will play the game in the end. So and we predict that this will only become like more important in the years to come. Then content for other games, which is something that is often overlooked. Obvious examples would be Minecraft and Roblox and Riot, who have established this Riot Forge, where other people can make games based on their IPs. I found a number that said that the Roblox developers expect this year that other developers who are making content within Roblox, they will earn more than $250 million this year. So there's actually a very viable business making content for other games. So it's just to say that this is worth checking out. This can be a very viable way to make a living as a game developer, and it is perhaps a bit overlooked, so it's not as crowded as other places. Then of course you have like game streaming, which is not really established yet, but so it's more of a long bet. But what seems interesting is that so far game streaming is like mimicking the way you play games on your PC or console normally. But what there might be an opportunity for is actually making games that make use of the different distribution that happens on streaming, because you have everything running from a central server, which gives you opportunities for example, running like huge multiplayer games with advanced physics or massive amounts of players or stuff like that. That wouldn't be possible due to bandwidth issues in the normal setup. So, and there doesn't seem to be any like games that have utilized that yet. Then hyper-casual games are still evolving. I mean, it's a bit more mature, but it's still evolving. And what we see is that what's happening right now is that people who used to play like very small, casual Flash games, they will be moving over to phone now because Flash is being discontinued. So there's hyper-casual is still evolving and still growing. So that's an interesting space right now. And it's not mature enough yet that you won't be able to get into it. You can still get into it before it solidifies, like, for example, a lot of mobile games is today. And evolving markets will drive growth, where growth will happen in like the next 2 to 5 years. There will still be some growth in Asia, but stuff like Middle East, North Africa, India will probably become much more important in the coming years. So it's a good idea to focus on that, and also one of the challenges about this is that you can't just necessarily just put your stuff out on the App Store and expect it to be bought in those places. For example, if China, you will have to like make a local deal with someone representing you in China. But also in, for example, a lot of African countries, you still need like a local publisher of some sort, because a lot of the distribution happens through like telco-owned portals and stuff like that. And more genres will probably come to mobile. You know, 3 years ago, people would say, "Oh, you can't do a shooter on mobile." But now Fortnite and PUBG on mobile are like huge titles, and we would expect other genres to follow along. It could be like simulation games, it could be like grand strategy, but we would expect that these will come eventually to mobile. So maybe there's a good business in going in and becoming one of the first titles to actually represent these genres on the mobile platform, and kind of crack the problem of how do you convert this genre that's normally on a console or PC to make it pleasant to play on a mobile phone. And I would just say, like, the jury's still out on stuff like VR-based games, AR-based games, and blockchain-based games that are like, the interesting stuff might happen, but it's not super clear if it's going to be happening in games, because what we're seeing with VR and AR right now is that a lot of the development on these technologies is happening outside of games. It's happening like in health, education, stuff like that. But on the other hand, you also have some examples of successes like Beat Saber that kind of also says that, well, there might actually be a market for VR games as well. And blockchain is still like, yeah, we need something to prove that this is interesting to put into games. We need a success of some kind. Okay. External opportunities. And this is some of the stuff that Vision Denmark is very interested in, because this is some of the stuff that takes games and combines it with other things. Well, let's take a look at those. Well, obviously, game tech is moving into other visual production, and there's actually a spelling error in the headline saying that. I can tell. I'm sorry about that. And that just means that you have like Unreal Engine and Unity being used in producing film and TV, instead of like and not just using it for special effects, but also using it for like more like mundane production issues. The most popular example is probably like the Mandalorian, which uses Unreal Engine for a lot of its like visual effects. You can see, for example, this shot. It's actually, they're standing in front of like an LED screen that is like, that is supposed to look like some kind of landscape, because the tech has now reached a point where you can actually do this and it will not look fake. Then you have like games as part of larger story worlds, and that's because we see a tendency for games not to exist like as isolated product, but to an increasing degree being a part of like a greater thing, like some collective story world that's also represented in film, TV, books, all kinds of like different representations. Like classic examples would be some of the stuff that the Lego do. I mean, they probably like, that was probably actually what saved them. You know, the common story is that Bionicle saved Lego, and that was probably actually one of the first examples of them thinking of like a story world, saying of like, we are going to make something that is like a physical toy, but it's also a game and it's also a TV series at the same time. Another good example would be like Pokemon, which is also like one like collective IP, but represented on a lot of different platforms. And of course, like, this is where our collaboration with DIKU comes into the picture. We believe that there's also a business opportunity and a better collaboration between institutions, because as of now, like the industry and the educational institutions have been kind of like walled off from each other and like been making their own things. And what we need to do is be better at talking to each other, so that challenges and opportunities in the games industry can inform the research that's happening at the institutions, but also so that the games industry will be aware of the stuff happening at the institutions and looking at that and seeing, is there some commercial upside to this that we can use in some way. And of course, we're talking to DIKU here now, and this webinar is like a first example of some of the stuff we can do. But we're also talking to, for example, the IT University about what can we do? Can we do some kind of events, you know, to help the two sides inform each other? And then finally, it's like this more broadly, you know, the use of game design methods in other industries, in education, in health, in training, and like in app design in general. I just have some quick examples, like Labster is making like a VR version of a like chemistry laboratory for educational purposes, which is of course much easier, and with the corona and all that stuff, great timing, because now we can do like chemical experiments from home. Health, like there's a lot of examples. I found a Danish one that's called Stigemester, I think, like Injection Champion or whatever, where it's a project that is using like AR to teach children how to inject themselves with insulin if they have diabetes. Training, here's an example from Bolværk, who've made like VR training tools for cabin personnel in airplanes, because it's very difficult and expensive to ground an airplane for training. So this is a great way to experience and train like dangerous situations without using expensive flight hardware, without, you know, setting anyone in danger. And like an example of using game design in general app design would be stuff like Endomondo, where it's like, oh, let's put in achievements for like this fitness app. So this is like using game design methods, putting in achievements, so you will be more encouraged to become fit and use this app, because you use like game design logic to make it an enticing application. I think that was it. I hope you bear with me. It was really fast. I had a lot of ground to cover, but I wanted to let you know that you're always welcome to contact me if you have any questions. We are doing like events on a regular basis on like more specific and narrow themes about these about, you know, driving a successful games business. And you can find us on the web, on Twitter, and on Facebook. And yeah, and I don't know if there's a question or two, I'll be happy to answer. I don't know if we have time for it, or maybe we should save that for the panel. That's probably up to you, Anders.
Well, there was a question. Well, we'll save the larger questions for later, and please write them in the chat. There was a question in the chat about 1/7 of the people on Earth are gamers. Are 1/7 of the people on the Earth gamers?
I would I would say probably more, because maybe you can calculate that 1/7 is digital gamers. But the thing about games is also that games, they are inherent to human nature. So even if we're not playing digital games, we create games in our head. You know, when you're trying not to step on the lines on the sidewalk, that's a game you make for yourself. When you run with your friend to see who can reach like the bus stop first, that's also a game. I mean, games are inherent to human nature. But if 1/7 of the Earth is playing digital games, I would probably actually say more, but I mean, it's definitely 1/7.
Yes, thank you very much, Jesper. We'll continue the discussion later. I will give the word to Matthias.